Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, I am honored to welcome Julio Barea. He is the Vice President of Sales at Ally and CareTime. Welcome, Julio. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic, Lance. Good morning. How are you?
Wonderful. It's great to meet you. I want to just jump into this really quickly because, our viewers and listeners, they try to stay well informed and we try to help inform them. And so we're excited to have you here from Ally and CareTime. But for people who may not be familiar with Ally and CareTime, can you kind of give us a breakdown of what each of those companies are?
Happy to do so. So it's very simple. Ally CareTime are two agency management platforms that play in different sides of the space. On CareTime, we have our traditional agency management. We focus very heavily on Medicaid. I would dare to say that we may do Medicaid better than anyone else. We have a platform that will help make your agency more efficient by creating caregiver retention, efficient and easy onboarding, fast and accurate claims processing, and making sure that you're always audit ready. And so that's CareTime. We also provide third-party billing services and revenue cycle management services in the Medicaid space. We were first to market about 2 years ago, which is pretty cool. And now if you see the market, there's a few others coming in behind us. But if you're a Medicaid agency that's frustrated by the complexities of changing MCO requirements, specs and Medicaid claims submission, changes that the states are doing across the country, and you want to focus on growing your business and really improving those outcomes for your client, then maybe considering somebody like us who are true professionals at billing can come in and help you. On the non-agency side, Ally does very much the same thing, but in the registry space. And by registry, we mean agencies that use independent contractors instead of W-2 employees. And the reason those are two separate platforms and a service on the Ally side is that the compliance and regulatory landscape is very different. As you can imagine, you know that there are some states and areas that are not very friendly to people using independent contractors. And our space is generally one that isn't either. But there are areas that have licenses for that, Florida being a very big state for that, and a couple other states that are good for that. Even California is a decent market if you have the right thing in place. And so that's why we have two platforms.
No, that makes perfect sense. I know, speaking of Medicaid, I just want to clarify for people because at least for us with our company, we get a lot of confusion when you say Medicare, Medicaid. Medicaid is regulated by each individual state. There is crossovers and similarities across the country, but Medicare is federally regulated and provided. So Medicare, Medicaid, I just like to make that distinction for people. But you are the Medicaid expert, Julio, so I would love for you to kind of give us a Medicaid 101.
Great. I'll make it very simple. So it's all about how the money flows, right? Medicaid is a state-administered program. It's funded jointly by the federal government and the state. Essentially, states have an X amount of funds allocated. Federal has matching funds plus extra funds. But the state is the one that manages enrollment, eligibility rules, benefit packages, rates, and those vary from state to state. So for a home care agency, the flow might look like the state, sometimes via a managed care organization, authorizes services and sets rates. The provider delivers and submits claims to the state or the MCO, and then the payer pays the claim after adjudication. Medicare is federal, standardized, and episodic. Episodic home health with a skilled certification, whereas Medicaid is ongoing, long-term, and focused on a broader continuum of support. Private pay is client family agency billing with immediate pricing control, and then Medicaid is enrollment and program specific. Medicare, because it's federal, it's a single payer, CMS, Center for Medicaid Services. So it's a very simple, maybe not simple, it's an easier process for a home health agency to do, even though the requirements to bill Medicare are more complex, they don't change from state to state. In Medicaid, you guys in Michigan have one set of rules. I'm in Georgia, I have another set of rules that's very much completely different from Medicaid in Michigan. So I hope that helps explain it a little better.
No, I think that's perfect. And there's a lot of myths associated, obviously, with Medicaid. And I would love to see if you could give us some of the biggest misconceptions that agency owners have about Medicaid and as a payer source specifically. And how do you guys help them to overcome those fears?
Great question. So the most common myth, I'm sure you've heard it, and everyone says it, is that Medicaid pays too little. And while there's a kernel of truth to that, they do typically have the lower reimbursements versus Veterans Affairs, which are substantially higher, long-term care insurance or private pay. But I think too little is a matter of degree. I know some of the biggest agencies in the country are independent Medicaid agencies. I have one client, they have 7,000 clients in Wisconsin. They're killing it, making a ton of money entirely in the consumer directed space with reimbursements of $23.50 to $24 an hour. So that's really a matter of degree and efficiency as to whether it pays too little. The other thing you're going to hear is it's a compliance nightmare. And compliance is difficult and requires focus on process and systematizing the things that you do to make sure you're not missing anything. But an agency that is well run and organized, compliance can be easy. And I'll be honest, compliance drives revenue. And I think of things being hard as an opportunity,
Hmm.
because I'll say to myself, if it's difficult for me, it's difficult for everybody, which means I just have to execute better. And if I execute better, then I can win more often than those that don't execute. So I would say to Medicaid agencies, don't think of compliance as an obstacle. Think of it as an opportunity to carve out a niche of doing things better than maybe others in the space.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry, Julio. Did you want to finish or?
I had one more I was going to mention that people think that Medicaid creates more liability, which it can be, again, through the compliance. But once again, if you systematize and understand what you're doing, it really isn't that difficult to manage.
Yeah. Talking about compliance and regulation and oversight, we here in Michigan, and I've spoken about this often on the show, Michigan is a non-licensed state for home care, which for us being an established, reputable company, we absolutely despise that because we get families all the time that come to us and say, well, we hired a company to take care of mom. And, the company in reality was like, two friends that decided to say they had a company. They were well within their rights and means to do so. But the family has no protection. They're not providing workman's comp. They don't have liability, bonding, insurance, and all these other things. And, I think that's one of the obstacles for the home care industry as a whole. And for us, we did look into, and maybe you can educate me and make me more informed about this. We have looked into it periodically, being able to provide Medicaid services, but we're doing primarily one-on-one care. And so we're W-2'd our employees, so we're paying the taxes and everything else. When you looked at it, we would actually lose money for billing if we were providing one-on-one care to a Medicaid recipient. Has that changed in the last couple of years that we may not be familiar or aware of?
That's an interesting question. I think there's a wrong way and a right way to do Medicaid, and I typically recommend Medicaid as a mix of your overall payer source.
Sure.
I would say that if you were starting from from client zero with Medicaid, you aren't going to make any money on these clients until you surpass a certain amount of volume, because you're going to have fixed cost
Right.
in your overall infrastructure, right? Which is why I recommend diversification, utilization, and scale. Nothing scales faster than Medicaid. Nothing is more evenly there's no more evenly flowing payer source that doesn't go up and down with the economy or with things like that. So it makes it easy. So I always recommend folks get some private pay to keep your margin in place. That gives you some flexibility. That private pay can cover keeping the lights on, paying your billers, paying your schedulers, doing the basics. And then when you add clients on top of an already established system, then the margin doesn't matter as much. So I don't know your specific situation, but definitely there are ways, if you do the math, it doesn't make sense. But there are ways where it does make very much so sense. And I've implemented 2,500 agencies in the last 5 years, and 60% of those agencies are Medicaid, and some fail.
Yeah.
But there are many, 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 most that succeed very much so, but they do it because they really have a focused strategic plan to get there. But if you ask me, can I make money on Medicaid from client one? The answer is no. You have to have some room to grow that and get that economy of scale.
To me, it's always for our model, which is primarily one-on-one. We don't do group homes. It seemed as though you almost needed to do like a group home setting where maybe you had a 5-8 residential bed setting where you had 1 or 2 employees that you're paying to take care of that group of people rather than doing one-on-one, so that you are able to go above make a profit off of it. But again, it just, it's very interesting. I'm fascinated by Medicaid. I try to educate myself on, Michigan's Medicaid all the time, because I feel like at some point in the future, and maybe this is wishful thinking, Julio, I'm hoping that Medicare and Medicaid will provide a actual full reimbursement rate for home care to provide these families with that care, because I think it minimizes the expense to them in the long run by keeping them in their home rather than going into a facility, because a facility is going to cost a lot more than having, the care provided in your home if you're, qualified medically wise.
Oh yeah, you couldn't be more right. I mean, ever since COVID proved to the
Yeah.
medical industry in general that there's a benefit to care at home versus the hospital, and with value-based care and PDGM and all the other things that are happening on the skilled side, insurance companies and payers are desperate to keep people out of the hospital.
Right.
So anything that you can do that is going to be beneficial to the insurance companies. And Medicare has been flirting for, I think, 6 years. They technically have a home care coverage on Medicare Advantage. I don't know anyone that's taking it or using it, and I ask everybody I talk to. But once they figure that out, I think you're correct. 100%, that's where it's going to go at some point in the future. But the bottom line is, here's the truth. Private pay is feast or famine, right? It's going to go up, it's going to go down. You're fighting against other people in the area. Medicaid evens all that out. You're not going to get rich off a single client, but you're building a rock solid base that that keeps caregivers paid, keeps cash flow steady, and it's all about volume, consistency, and resilience. And this is something that I preach all the time. I think we want to come up with ways to grow our business and our industry and put pressure on the governments to increase those reimbursements, which has had some mixed success depending on the state that you're in.
Right. Well, and one fun fact I wanted to share with you, because I think of all people, you'd appreciate this. So 5-6 years ago, our office got a call from Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is one of the largest private health insurance in the country. And they wanted us to do an assessment for one of their insured. And so I called the case manager myself, because I said, it's going to be another mistaken identity. They're going to think we're, home health care or something. Mm-hmm. And I talked to the case manager. She says, before you say anything, I know you're probably confused. Health insurance doesn't provide for home care. She says, except in this situation. So that got my attention immediately. She said, we have a woman and she had ALS and she needs home care. And we had a board meeting in our company at Blue Cross Blue Shield. And we gave the approval that we are going to provide coverage for her through home care, because we identified that it was going to be more cost effective for us as the insurer than to put her in a nursing home. That just blew me away. And I said, wow. I said, yeah, absolutely. We can help. We could do whatever you need for her. And I said, but let me ask you a question now. I said, couldn't you make the same argument for everybody you put in the nursing home? And she says, that's actually a great point. She says, but this one was unique. The family was protesting and didn't want her to go in, and they gave us facts and figures. So it just made me wonder if more families actually tried to protest that and say, no, we want to keep mom, dad, husband, wife in the home rather than her going into a facility. And it's going to actually save you, the insurer, thousands of dollars by doing that. So I thought, have you ever heard of a situation like that before?
No, this is the first time I've heard it. I'm very excited to hear it. I mean, I know it's only one person in one step, but for Blue Cross Blue Shield, whom I know well,
right,
to make an exception to their rules and regulations, as you and I both know, is a very rare event.
Yes.
I think the interesting key point that you said is the family has advocated. You said protested, which means they probably were fairly difficult to deal with,
Yeah.
and were very focused about what they wanted. I think advocacy matters. On the registry space, which is very contingent upon the federal government making changes to Department of Labor laws. We've been advocating with them, with other industry organizations. And I go to DC every year for 2 lobby days, one for the registry business and one for the home care business. And we've been pushing to get that companionship exemption returned for 6 years. And we have sat in every congressional's office. I've been in front of, a couple of dozen different congressmen, a couple of dozen different senators, along with a bunch of other folks. And we just had the companionship exemption reinstated. Of course, it was due to an administration change, but still, we believe that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been sitting there going, hey, when there's a change in what the administration wants, which happens in an election, then we can get this exemption put in place. And there it is, right? It's not final yet and it's coming, but that's a game changer for parts of the industry. So to your point, I think we should be loud and vocal in an effective or professional way to the people that make these decisions and let them know, because you're correct. We did an analysis with a very large national home health company, one of the top three, when I was at another software company. And they came to us and said they wanted us to take their home care non-skilled referrals, because they did a study and they found that if you took a 12-week heart attack episode for a patient, and they don't have home care, and you take that same 12-week episode for a heart attack patient with home care, the outcome was 30% better with home care.
I believe it.
That's a no-brainer. And hospitalization was down 20%.
Yeah.
Right. And now you and I know this because we're into business. We know that people who come care for them, they're happier, they're healthier, they take their medication, they eat their food, they live in a clean home. They have somebody to talk to is probably the most important thing, that they have somebody to talk to a few days a week. So I think that there's a pressure and a movement happening that I certainly hope you and I live long enough to see it.
I agree. I agree. And to see the Braves win another World Series, but that's another conversation.
I will live long enough for that.
Yeah, you will. Yeah, you will. I want to talk a little bit about the contracting and the enrollment process. What does the Medicaid contracting process really look like for a home care agency, and where do most providers really get stuck, and how can they get through that faster?
Good question. So I'm not a credentialing expert. Let me put that out there first. I do work with two very wonderful credentialing experts. But contracting has a few steps, right? You have to first get licensed through the state to carry Medicaid, which is a lengthy application process. And then once you've got your provider enrollment with the state, you're going to have to get credentialing and contracts with any of the MCOs if it's an MCO state, right? If you're going to have to contract with Blue Cross, United, Aetna, Molina, Sunshine, or any of the other MCOs that are out there managing Medicaid, you have to have a separate contract with them. That's a negotiation situation where you negotiate and accept the service rates they're going to give you. And then you complete your billing setup, your clearinghouse, your payer IDs, how you're going to get your electronic remittance, which is what's been paid, how it's been paid, and if it's denied and why it was denied. The number one place that agencies get stuck is paperwork and supporting documents. You take Georgia, and I'm not a credentialing expert, but I do know Georgia. The Georgia Medicaid provider application is 37 pages long. It has a lot of information in it. If I am a caregiver, and very many startup agencies are caregivers who want to do something better with their lives, or they want to make a little more money, they want to open up a business, going through that paper can be extremely daunting to go through that. Understanding the requirements, making sure you didn't fill out something incorrectly. So that's the number one place that it happens. And I honestly recommend anybody who's getting Medicaid certified, work with a credentialing expert so you don't make those mistakes. It's going to cost you a little bit of money, but it will save you money in the long run.
Absolutely.
Understanding the provider types and service codes that apply to home care. If you look at Michigan, I think Michigan has 7 different waiver programs, might be 8 different waiver programs. There could be more that I don't know about, with 2 different payers. And so you have to walk your way through that. Which payer am I working with? Which waiver program? Which service codes are authorized, right? What does a prior authorization look like? And how do I set up a schedule based on a proper authorization? How do I do a care plan? So these are the steps of setting it up to be correctly, and that can be difficult. And then finally, the third biggest challenge is just getting the MCO to approve you,
Right.
which you will find in some states is very fast. And in some states, the MCOs really, really drag that process along because they unofficially don't really want any new providers, but they can't say that.
Right.
So that's kind of how that happens. So the way to avoid that is you got to have a checklist, background check policies, liability insurance, corporate documentation. I honestly wouldn't recommend it for anyone that's never done it before. I would hire an expert to help you set it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, kind of sticking with, billing and paperwork and everything. What are some of the most common Medicaid billing mistakes that you see that agencies are making, and how do those mistakes impact their cash flow?
Good question. So, if you take what I said earlier, compliance drives revenue, right? The number one is improper authorization, as in they schedule a shift for a client and they perform the shift for that client, and they either had an incorrect or expired or not begin, or they did it before the authorization began, right? And for those that don't know Medicaid, an authorization comes from the payer or the state that says, Lance is authorized for 20 hours a week for companionship care, and you're going to go ahead and create a schedule for 3 days a week at 4 hours a day, with the fifth day at 6 hours, whatever you need to fill those 20 hours. And here's the service code T1019, right? Which is personal care, which is the most common. So what you see is that they'll perform the service without making sure they have those in place. Coding errors is another big one, right? They performed a service for T1019, but they sent over the claim with something else, right? So the claim gets out there and it gets denied because they used the wrong service code. So those are the two big ones. The rest of it's documentation stuff. You're not keeping EBV records and things like that. But the first two are the very, very most common, and they can easily be solved by simply just dotting your I's and crossing your T's. At the beginning of your agency, set up a process in place. A client comes in, we input the authorization, we verify the schedule to the authorization, we verify the service code, we review the claims, right? It's just about doing things step by step by step and not rushing and not skipping any steps.
Julio, I just want to follow up on that really quickly. When and if somebody did make a mistake in billing, what does that do to their, approval and their certification to provide Medicaid services? Does it get frozen and then an audit's performed, or is it like a typo and you can just say, oops, we made a mistake? Like how significant is making a mistake in billing when it comes to Medicaid?
Thanks for reminding me. That was the second part of your previous question. So the impact is big, right? If the first one is the claim goes across incorrectly, the claim gets denied.
Mm-hmm.
So if you bill biweekly, which we recommend weekly billing, so you've already done the shift. You have to pay the caregiver. 2 weeks goes by before you even filed the claim. Then you file that claim. Anywhere from 24 to 48 hours later to 3 days, that claim gets denied. By the time you get to that denial and correct that denial and then resend, you're down another week, right? And then by the time you get that and wait to get paid, it's another week. So you could go from the time you did the shift to the time you got that money 4 weeks. That's a big cash flow carry, right? And if you have 100 clients or even 50 clients on 3 shifts a week doing 150 claims a week at 2 to 3 hours at, let's call it $100 a claim, you're talking thousands and thousands of dollars sitting out there, and you still have to pay your bills, keep the lights on, pay your employees and everything else. So cash flow takes a huge hit to the negative if you don't get those claims across accurately. And then finally, even more importantly, if you consistently do that incorrectly, you're going to trigger an audit.
Yeah.
And if you trigger an audit, and typically speaking, if you're not doing your billing correctly, you probably have something else wrong in your compliance, and the auditor could come in and you could be at risk of a suspension until correcting the problem.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So let's talk about the best billing practices. What are some of the billing best practices that every agency should have in place to stay audit ready and to keep their reimbursement cycle moving smoothly?
I think the very first thing is standardized documentation. Mm-hmm. So every client that walks in the door, and I alluded to it earlier, should have a document that shows their authorization, their medical necessity, their diagnosis, the service code, right? Their their availability for shifts in care, their requirements for shifts in care, matching those requirements to a caregiver. So basically an intake checklist. Did we confirm eligibility, authorization, start end dates, and who's paying for it, right? Once we have that in place and we know we're onboarding clients correctly, every day run a weekly denial report, run an accounts receivable report to know how much money you have out there, assign ownership to someone to verify this on a daily basis. Make sure that everyone in the office is trained on state compliance, billing rules, and common denial reasons. Make sure you have a good document retention system. So if you do all these things, you're going to reduce denials, shorten your AR cycle, and you're going to make audits a lot less painful. It's essentially what I said at the beginning: systematize every single thing you do, and that will help you stay audit ready and keep the claims moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that's right in your wheelhouse, aside from Medicaid, is technology. How does technology, specifically platforms like CareTime, help to simplify Medicaid billing and help these agencies avoid these denials, rejections, and even maybe a potential audit?
I think the short version is technology automates the repetitive, error-prone parts of Medicaid billing. If we can automate it, we should. And really, the human element should only be oversight, review, and quality assurance, and let the automation take over the pushing of the buttons and the setting of the levers and everything else. Platforms like CareTime, we centralize the authorizations, we link the documentation to the billing codes, we flag mismatches before claims go out, and we generate all the reports for audits. So what that does is it reduces human error, reduces denials, and speeds that payment cycle. So I guess the short term is good technology is a denial prevention engine, and it's an efficiency multiplier for your staff. Mm-hmm. When you're working in Medicaid, the goal is how much can I do without adding headcount?
Yeah.
Right? Because every headcount you add is going to tighten up your margin. And I'm getting deep into P&Ls, but it's the truth. If I can run an agency of 50 census, very, very efficiency, using the right technology and the right billing partner like CareTime, then I might be able to run that 50 client agency with 2 people. And typically they say you have to add a head for every 50 people. But what if I only have to add a head for every 100 people?
Right.
Well, now I've just saved myself another 30% in headcount and labor cost. So automation promotes efficiency, it promotes accuracy, and in the end, that pads your bottom line. And in the Medicaid world, you need every penny you can get.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about CareTime, but not every agency owner wants to change platforms because it's a big undertaking and very daunting, like you mentioned earlier. But how does CareTime's third-party billing option allow agencies to stay where they're at while also still getting that expert support?
Good question. So it's about ripping and replacing, right? When we talk to agencies, they will call us on the phone and they'll say to us, I'm having trouble with my billing. My claims aren't getting out. My claims are getting denied. I don't understand why my EVV data isn't correct. My EVV data doesn't match my claims. We hear all kinds of different permutations of this. However, they may be having these problems, but they also like a lot of things about their platform, or they're used to their platform, or their platform does something that maybe CareTime doesn't. It's not common, but it does happen. Mm-hmm. And so these people may be resistant to changing that platform in EHR. And this is the way the traditional Medicaid agency software space was for years. Almost 3 years ago, CareTime said, myself and my boss, we sat down and we said, how can we do better at this? Because we had a lot of agencies, I'd love to use CareTime, but I don't want to change, but my billing is a mess. So we started our third-party billing revenue cycle management division. And now what we can do is 2 things. If you're able and can switch to CareTime to make your agency more efficient, we would prefer that you do so. But if you're happy with your current system, you just don't have a good handle on your billing, well, we can come in and you keep your workflow, you keep your clinical system, and all you're doing is outsourcing your billing work to experts like ours. Think of us as a biller who's not in your office. We're going to log into your system. We're going to gather the claims data. We're going to resubmit the claims, submit the claims, follow up the denials, returns, clean up the remittances, post the 835s back to your AR. And this keeps the agency in control of their clinical operations and staffing while getting that solid billing expertise. And I'll be honest, it has really taken off. It's our fastest growing division by far. I would say 200% in the last 12 months, and we're probably predicting 300% next year. It's been an absolute, and people thank us for it. They really, really thank us for it because the conversations are, oh, I don't have to leave my software. No, you don't, but we can help you with your billing.
Yeah, that's incredible, Julio. Let's talk a little bit about the stability and growth. Medicaid often gets described as recession resistant. Can you explain, though, how Medicaid provides that stability for agencies, especially during times of an economic uncertainty?
Yeah, great question. So, who does Medicaid serve? Populations whose needs do not disappear in downturns. In other words, if I have a financial hardship in an economic upturn, it's doubtful that economic hardship is going to resolve itself in a downturn, right? So what you have is people that are Medicaid qualified are always going to be there regardless of what their overall economy is doing. So Medicaid being funded by governments and serving populations whose needs don't disappear, while private pay demand can drop, Medicaid demand generally remains or grows, which provides revenue stability. As a matter of fact, in some times of crisis, it's huge. For example, during COVID, many of our clients, our company included, had our best year in 2020 and 2021 because everybody stayed home and care had to be in the home.
Right.
And so that was, we are not proud that we profited in a time when things were good. But at the same time, we served a population that needed that care at home. And so that's something that we're very proud of. So many states today, knowing this, they're expanding their home and community-based services as a cost-effective alternative to institutional care. And we started our conversation with this. I think that policy tailwind is going to increase demand for home care providers, which is only going to increase the opportunity for Medicaid referrals because the Medicaid population is not going away,
Right.
and it is going to grow.
Right.
I'd like to see it be a case where you could see it go and shrink, but historically speaking, we have yet to see the Medicaid population get any less on a year-over-year basis.
Right. And I know for us, and I completely relate to what you're saying, you don't want to profit off of a bad situation, but like for us with home care, we had countless families whose loved ones were in nursing homes and facilities of some type, and they discovered one way or another they could bring their loved one home and still get that care in the home. So they're calling us to provide it. We experienced a significant growth during COVID, like most healthcare type companies, but it wasn't something we were overly excited about, but we felt excited that we were able to help these people in a very serious, dire circumstance where, especially in Michigan, you get a foot of snow and they're getting to see their mom, their grandma, their husband, their wife through a glass window standing in a foot of snow, and they, and especially for people dealing with dementia, they're not understanding what's going on, and then they could get back home to their familiar surroundings. And that was something we were very proud to be able to do for them. And it also, for us, it allowed the home care industry and us specifically in our area, people all of a sudden discovered that this was even a thing they could take advantage of. This was a resource. Most people aren't aware of home care, sadly and unfortunately, and they don't know what it is. And then when they do discover it, it's like an epiphany. They're amazed that they never knew about this before. So it's just something, we're honored to be able to play a small part in help and support our communities. But, I want to close on this, Julio. Do you have any insights or thoughts on where you think the future of Medicaid and Medicaid billing might be headed over the next few years? And is there anything agencies can do to prepare for that?
I think it's a good question. And I think to answer the last part of the question first, expect change. The only way you're going to prepare for this stuff is to know that whatever's happening this year in Medicaid will not be happening next year in Medicaid in your state or the year after that. It is constantly going to be changing. And the reason that it's constantly going to be changing is financial, right? So every time I speak about Medicaid, somebody in the audience raises their hands and says, well, what if there's no Medicaid in 2 years? And I'm betting my business on it. And I answer the same way. Do you think there's not going to be people with economic need in this country in 2 years? Are they going to disappear? Are they going to magically go away? They're not. They're going to be there. And there isn't a government, state or federal, that's going to not find a way to take care of those people. I mean, if you want to be pragmatic and realpolitik about it, you have to take care of those people.
Right.
But you have to find a way to do it that fits inside the budgets that we have. So Medicaid will always be there, but it could look very different than it does look today. For example, 5 years ago, very few people used MCOs as a managed care organization to manage care organization to manage their Medicaid claims. Now most states have moved to that model. The states aren't handling the money. They give a book of money to the payer, and then the payer manages the payments. Today, that's very common. Another thing that wasn't as big a few years ago is consumer-directed services, structured family care, I think in Michigan is what it's called. And so that's where you use family or friends of the client or the caregivers. That's the fastest growing program. Yeah. So I would say you want to get ready for the future, expect it to change, make sure you have super efficient operations in place, be better than everybody else, and start looking at consumer-directed programs and other waiver programs that bring the caregiver with them so you can manage growth in a time of very little caregiver availability. And then buckle your seatbelt. It's going to be a wild ride.
All right. Well, Julio Barea, he is the Vice President of Sales at Ally and CareTime. Before we go, and this is all going to be in the show notes for people that want to reach out to you guys, but for those listening, where would you like people to go to learn more about these services and to just sign up?
Great. Thank you very much. So the best place to go is to caretime.us. And caretime.us will take you to our website. On there, you can chat with us. You can call our sales line at 321-392-6422, or you can reach out to my email address and be happy to chat with me, which is julio.barea@allycaretime.com.
Perfect. Well, Julio, thank you so much. I love talking about Medicaid. I'm probably one of the few people that really love it, but I do. I think it's a great resource, and I think it's something that everybody needs to be aware of because, again, just like Medicaid changes, people's circumstances change as well. They may not need it today, but down the road, you don't know what your future holds. You may need these resources that Medicaid provides you with. So it's always good to be informed and up to date on things. So thank you for your time today.
Perfect. Thank you for your time as well. It's a pleasure working with you, Lance.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, ask questions, or if you have show ideas. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Julio Barea for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.